Salt.
The 2015 Dietary Guidelines Process was first announced in the Federal Register on Friday, October 26, 2012. I welcome this news because I was hoping that for the first time in 15 years, the individual responsible for the SALT recommendations might be replaced. After all, every 5-year review of the guidelines was supposed to be a fresh new look at the evidence. But somehow the Institute of Medicine managed to get the very same person to head up the section on SALT every time. Certainly no way to get a clean, unbiased evaluation of the evidence. I also felt that the large body of new evidence published in the last 5 years would temper the future discussions on salt consumption and cause the public health community to take a more balanced view of overall health outcomes. It was certainly clear to everyone involved in the SALT debate that this new evidence, coming from all around the globe, all cautioned against broad cuts in salt intake and would have to be considered carefully by the 2015 Dietary Guidelines Advisory Group. But this was not to be. At the very same time the Federal Register announced the 2015 Dietary Guidelines, the Institute of Medicine, or the IOM, announced a new Consequences of Sodium Reduction in Populations initiative, paid for with your tax dollars by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, which is led by Dr. Thomas Frieden, the man behind the National Salt Reduction Initiative. You would think that such a process might fairly evaluate all that clinical results from the last number of years, but one look at the makeup of the hand-picked IOM committee revealed that 80% of its members were already down on the public record as being fully committed to population-wide salt reduction. The only conclusion possible was that this was a hand-picked jury whose role was to arrive at a prejudged interpretation of the evidence, and that they would have to do it before the new 2015 Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee ever had a chance to consider it. Was this science or was this politics? But the intrigue doesn't stop there. Within a week of the Federal Register notice, the American Heart Association magazine, called Circulation, came out with a so-called presidential advisory entitled Sodium, Blood Pressure, and Cardiovascular Disease, Further Evidence Supporting the American Heart Association Sodium Reduction Recommendations. A paper that was cobbled together by 16 well-known anti-salt advocates, what I would call the usual suspects, and on their own they decided to review all the evidence of the last 5 years and, to no one's particular surprise, concluded that they were all irrelevant. Interestingly, one of those authors who arrived at this conclusion also happened to be on the IOM committee that hadn't even started considering the question. How's that for having an objective IOM committee? You call that science? Anyone who does not consider this a blatant corruption of what is supposed to be an objective analytical process must be living in a different galaxy. Since then, there have been several additional publications by the same usual suspects in the New England Journal of Medicine and the British Medical Journal, all offering their gratuitous opinions that the research carried out in the last number of years showing the negative consequences of salt reduction is all, you guessed it, irrelevant. Now, no one ever asked these people for their opinions, and they're not presenting any new evidence. They're all simply attacking the evidence that counters their salt reduction agenda before the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee even has a chance to consider it. Why are they so anxious to take that decision away from the Dietary Guidelines Committee? Is that science or is that politics? Could it be that they fear that this new evidence might derail the agenda they have carefully contrived for years now? Stay tuned for the next video to learn what happens when you ignore the evidence on negative outcomes.
Salt.